The LPGA just embarrassed the entire WNBA using their own biggest star. And A'ja Wilson's reaction exposed everything wrong with women's basketball today. What started as Caitlin Clark picking up a golf club turned into the most brutal reality check the WNBA has ever received. And the jealousy that followed might have just revealed why one league is thriving while the other is stuck in neutral. Here's what nobody's talking about. When Caitlin Clark showed up at the Annika Pro-Am in 2025, she didn't just bring a few extra fans, she brought an army. The LPGA literally had to change their broadcast plans because the demand was so insane. Think about that for a second. A basketball player touched a golf club, and suddenly women's golf had its biggest viewership spike in years. Meanwhile, back in WNBA land, certain players were scrolling through social media, seething with jealousy, posting cryptic messages about media darlings getting everything handed to them. If you think this story is just about golf, you're missing the bigger picture entirely. Drop a comment below if you think A'ja Wilson needs to stop the jealousy and support her fellow athletes instead. But that wasn't even the beginning of how deep this goes. The moment news broke that Caitlin would be teeing off at the prestigious event, something fascinating happened. The LPGA didn't hide her. They didn't downplay her presence. They didn't act like she was stealing attention from their regular players. Instead, they rolled out the red carpet like she was Tiger Woods himself. They posted behind-the-scenes content, swing analyses, interviews, and treated her like the gift to women's sports that she actually is. Every fairway she walked turned into a mob scene. People who probably never watched women's golf in their lives suddenly cared about putting techniques in club selection. Networks scrambled for coverage rights. The media followed her around like she was the second coming of athletic greatness. What happened next would shock everyone who's been following the WNBA's treatment of their biggest star. While the LPGA was celebrating and thanking Caitlin for bringing new eyes to their sport, while golf legends were lining up to take photos with her and praising her impact, the WNBA's official channels went completely silent. Not one post, not one acknowledgement. Not one celebration of their own player dominating headlines and bringing positive attention to women's sports. It was like watching a parent ignore their child's achievement because they were too proud to admit they'd been wrong about them all along. The contrast couldn't have been more obvious if someone had drawn it in neon lights. LPGA players were literally approaching Caitlin on the course, introducing themselves, thanking her for what she was doing for women's sports. They understood something fundamental that seems to escape certain WNBA circles. When one female athlete rises, they all rise. When Caitlin Clark brings 1 million new viewers to women's golf, those viewers don't disappear afterward. They stick around. They discover new players. They become invested in the sport. But instead of celebrating this win for all women's athletics, A'ja Wilson and her circle were busy liking tweets about media bias and posting vague statements about certain people getting undeserved attention. Here's where it gets even more revealing. The Annika Pro-Am wasn't supposed to be televised initially. It was meant to be a small, intimate event for serious golf fans. But when word got out that Caitlin Clark would be participating, the demand became so overwhelming that broadcasters literally changed their entire schedule. Streaming numbers went through the roof. Social media engagement for the LPGA hit record highs. Golf courses around the country reported increased interest in women's golf programs, all because one basketball player decided to pick up a different kind of equipment for a day. And what was the WNBA's response to their player single-handedly elevating another women's sport? Crickets. Absolute crickets. But the silence from official channels was nothing compared to the passive-aggressive storm brewing on certain players' social media accounts. Without ever mentioning Caitlin's name directly, because she never does, A'ja Wilson started posting about how some people have to work harder for recognition, while others get it handed to them on a silver platter. The timing was so obvious it might as well have been written in bold letters. Her teammates and friends started liking and sharing posts calling Caitlin overhyped, claiming the media only promotes one face, suggesting that real champions don't need publicity stunts to stay relevant. The jealousy was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Let's be crystal clear about something. Caitlin Clark didn't ask for this attention. She didn't demand special treatment. She didn't push herself into golf's spotlight. She was invited, she showed up, she participated with grace and humility, and the sports world responded accordingly. She wasn't trying to overshadow anyone. She wasn't trying to steal thunder from other athletes. She was literally just playing golf for charity and having fun while doing it. But apparently, even that is too much for certain people to handle without turning it into a competition about who deserves more recognition. The really sad part is what this reveals about the state of the WNBA in 2025. While other leagues are figuring out how to leverage star power for mutual benefit, while they're understanding that collaboration beats competition every single time, the WNBA seems stuck in a mindset that there's only room for one star at a time. They act like attention is a zero-sum game where Caitlin getting coverage means everyone else gets less. That's not just wrong, it's actively harmful to the growth of the sport. Make sure to hit that like button if you agree the WNBA needs to embrace all their stars instead of creating unnecessary drama. What makes this whole situation even more ironic is that Caitlin Clark has done more for WNBA viewership in her short time in the league than almost anyone in recent history. She's brought new fans, younger demographics, increased merchandise sales, and mainstream media coverage that the league desperately needed. Yet instead of being celebrated as the rising tide that lifts all boats, she's treated like an outsider who doesn't deserve her success. The LPGA figured out in one weekend what the WNBA still hasn't grasped after all this time. Star power isn't a threat, it's an opportunity. Consider this shocking statistic. The Annika Pro-Am featuring Caitlin Clark generated more social media engagement for women's golf than their last 3 major championships combined. That's not normal. That's not just a little bump in interest. That's a seismic shift in attention that any smart organization would kill for. The LPGA understood this immediately and capitalized on it brilliantly. They didn't waste time worrying about whether their regular players would feel overshadowed. They focused on the bigger picture of growing their sport and reaching new audiences. Meanwhile, certain WNBA players were busy crafting subtle shade on Instagram stories and liking comments about how unfair media coverage is. The pettiness would be funny if it wasn't so damaging to the sport they claim to love. Every time A'ja Wilson or others in her circle throw shade at Caitlin's success, they're not just attacking one player. They're telling potential fans that women's basketball is full of drama and jealousy instead of unity and support. They're literally driving people away from the sport with their inability to celebrate success that isn't their own. Here's something else nobody wants to talk about. The LPGA players who met Caitlin that day weren't threatened by her presence. They were excited. They understood that having one of the biggest names in women's sports on their course meant more attention for everyone. They took photos with her, posted about the experience, thanked her publicly for bringing new energy to their tour. That's what professional athletes who understand the business side of sports do. They recognize opportunity when it walks onto their course wearing basketball shoes. But the most revealing moment came after the event ended. The LPGA posted a heartfelt thank you to Caitlin, calling her an inspiration and hoping she'd return soon. They highlighted how her presence had brought families to the course who'd never attended before, how young girls were suddenly interested in golf because they saw their basketball hero trying something new. It was genuine appreciation for what she'd brought to their sport. Compare that to the WNBA's approach, where Caitlin's every achievement seems to be met with either silence or subtle resentment from certain quarters. The truth that nobody wants to admit is that Caitlin Clark has become bigger than the WNBA itself, and that terrifies certain people who thought they'd always be the faces of women's basketball. She's transcended the sport in a way that few athletes ever do. She's become a cultural phenomenon that extends beyond basketball courts and into mainstream consciousness. And instead of riding that wave together, instead of using her star power to elevate everyone, parts of the WNBA act like she's stealing something that belonged to them. What's even more frustrating is that this pattern keeps repeating. Every time Caitlyn achieves something noteworthy, whether it's breaking records, appearing on major talk shows, or now succeeding in charity golf events, the same voices emerge with the same complaints. It's exhausting, it's predictable, and most importantly, it's holding back women's basketball from reaching its full potential. The LPGA showed in one weekend what embracing star power can do for a sport. They showed what happens when you celebrate success instead of resenting it. The saddest part of all this is that Caitlin Clark herself has never responded to any of the shade thrown her way. She's never called out Aja Wilson for the obvious jealousy. She's never posted cryptic messages about haters or doubters. She just keeps showing up, keeps performing, keeps growing women's sports with her presence and talent. She's literally doing the work while others are complaining about who gets credit for it. That's the difference between someone who understands their role in growing the game and someone who's too insecure to see beyond their own ego. As we move further into 2025, this divide is only becoming more obvious. The LPGA event wasn't just a one-off success story. It was a blueprint for how women's sports should handle transcendent talent. You don't hide it. You don't resent it. You don't act threatened by it. You embrace it, celebrate it, and use it to lift everyone up. The WNBA had that same opportunity and chose petty jealousy instead. They chose social media shade over strategic growth. They chose ego over evolution. The real question now is whether the WNBA will learn from this embarrassment or double down on their mistakes. Will they finally recognize that Caitlin Clark isn't their competition but their greatest asset? Will players like Aja Wilson finally stop the passive-aggressive posts and start supporting the growth of their sport regardless of who's leading it? Or will they continue down this path of resentment and watch as other leagues figure out what they couldn't? The LPGA just gave the WNBA a masterclass in marketing, unity, and strategic thinking. They showed what happens when you put the sport above individual egos. They demonstrated that there's enough spotlight for everyone if you're smart about how you use it. Most importantly, they proved that Caitlin Clark's impact extends far beyond basketball, and any sport smart enough to embrace her will reap the benefits. The only question left is whether the WNBA will swallow their pride and learn from this, or continue watching from the sidelines as other leagues show them how it's done.